Basic listener skills require two people, a speaker and a listener. For the purposes of this video, we will focus on the listener's physical response to what the speaker says. We cover a verbal response to someone else's verbal communication in a different video. The speaker says something such as, "touch the dog," and the listener responds by performing some action on the environment that corresponds with what the speaker said. Most listener skills you will teach involve either touching or pointing to something in the environment, as you saw it in the previous example, or performing some sort of action with his body. As with other skills, you begin by teaching listener skills that are easy for the learner and build to more complex skills. Make sure to have plenty of reinforcers around to help keep him motivated. When choosing what to teach first, start with things that the learner is already at least a little familiar with to give him the greatest chance for success. If he's likely to want the items you decide to teach first, use pictures of those items instead of the real items. To get started, place a small number of items or pictures in front of the learner. Usually it's best to start with 2 or 3, but if this is hard for him, you could start with just 1. Place the items in front of the learner wherever he chooses to play. Make sure he sees the reinforcers you have available. Get his attention and say, "Touch the dog." It's best to check to see if he can do this on his own before you decide to teach him. If he touches the dog on his own, you can move on to other targets or try increasing the array by adding another item or picture and check to see if he can still respond correctly. If the speaker says, "touch dog," and the listener touches the rabbit, the listener made an error. This is an indication that we might need to do some teaching, especially if this type of error happens frequently. When teaching the learner to respond correctly, you will begin by physically guiding the learner to the correct answer. If possible, it's best to guide the learner to the correct answer before he actually makes an error. If you see his hand move toward the wrong answer, immediately correct him before he has the opportunity to touch the wrong one. It's a minor distinction, but an important one. As the learner begins to improve in his response, you can begin to reduce the amount of help you give him. Do this gradually so he doesn't make mistakes. Eventually, move from guiding his hand to simply pointing to the correct answer, then pointing in the direction of the correct answer. Keep fading back until he answers correctly without any help from you. Gradually make the task more difficult by adding new targets and increasing the array of items or pictures you put in front of him. Each time you put the items or pictures in front of him, make sure to change their positions so he doesn't learn that point to dog means point to the picture in the middle on the bottom row. When starting to teach listener responding with actions, begin with targets that are easy for you to help him do, like clap, wave, or point. You can also teach him to point to facial features, such as his eyes, ears, or nose, or other body parts. For gross motor movements that you can't help him complete, like jumping, it's best to make sure he's able to imitate your movements before trying to teach him to display these actions when you tell him to. Immediately after you give him the direction, model the action. Over time, fade this help so he starts to do it independently. When asking him to do different things throughout his day, avoid providing additional prompts or cues, such as pointing or even looking at what you want him to do. Teach him to pay attention to what you say rather than relying on other cues. If he needs help, go ahead and help him, but then work on fading that help so he begins to become more independent. Watch the video about prompts and prompt fading to learn more about this strategy.